There's a number of things happening out there, so I hope everyone's staying safe and staying healthy and taking care of yourselves. So thanks very much. This is officially our second meeting of the Comprehensive Plan Implementation Committee. The first meeting was way back in June, if anyone can remember back that far. But this is really more of our kind of more official project kickoff. We have our portion of our consulting team is here with us, and so we're really going to get down into it today. So I think with that, should I share my screen for the presentation, Marcy? Should we go around and get introductions and stuff first? Does that make sense?
Screen first, please, and then we'll do introductions a couple of slides in.
Okay, you got it. So I'm going to do that. Sure. All right.
Hi. Okay, great. So yeah, Vera, thank you for welcoming everybody. I'm just going to move straight to the agenda slide, which is the next one in. And thank you for devoting a couple of hours of your evening to this. We're going to meet each other in a moment. I am a member of the consultant team, Marcy McAnally, and I'll introduce the other members in a moment. But first I wanted to go through some meeting protocol and introductions and how to make the best use of Zoom. And then after that sort of introduction to the project and the goals of the project and a general overview, I'm going to hand it over to Vera, who's going to go through a presentation called Comp Plan Implementation 101, Plan, Code, and Development Review Orientation. We'll pause at that moment when that presentation is over and ask clarifying questions about the presentation. And then we'll move into the second kind of major part of the presentation, which is, or the meeting, which is about the public engagement strategy, process and participants, which is about what is going to happen and when over the course of the next several months, and who is involved in the project and how. Then we're going to come back for a discussion that will facilitate, and everyone will be asking everybody to participate. We actually may be going around and calling on every person individually, so just be prepared for that. Then we'll open the meeting up for public comments. Okay, so let's move right into the next slide, please. Some Zoom meeting protocols are, we're in a webinar mode here, which means that those of us who are presenting, talking, are panelists, and audience members are participants and are muted as a default, but you can use the Q&A function, which I think we've agreed that will be chat. Please keep your microphones off, and please turn video off when the presentations are being given. That just allows us to have you to have more of a big view, I think, of the presentation. Use that chat feature to ask questions or comment. That's pointed. We have a little red box showing where the chat feature is. And you can type a comment to everyone. We're going to collect those questions, probably not answering them in real time, but rather at the point where we pause for questions. Okay, so next slide, please. Now I'd like to go around and do introductions, and we're going to use the list here to so if you could go in the order that you're shown there, please. But first, I think it might be more appropriate for us to introduce ourselves before we go into that. But I'll give you a little prompt about what we're going to be asking you to introduce yourself with, so you can be prepared when we come back around to you. And that is just a brief introduction, 1 minute maximum, about how long you've been in Milwaukee and what perspective you will be bringing to this project. So you know Vera, she welcomed you, and you probably know her from the first meeting. Mary Heberling, assistant planner here, and Layla Aman, community development director. I don't think Laura is here. Is that correct? Oh,
She
okay.
is.
She's here.
Yeah. Yep.
And Peter Passarelli, Public Works Director, is here, and Natalie Rogers, Climate Action and Sustainability Coordinator. Of the consultant team, there's me, Marcy McAnally from Herbsworks, and Kimmy Sloop from Barney and Worth. We have other people on the consultant team, but they're not here today. Keith Leiden, Jim Hankey of David Evans and Associates, Todd Prager of Terragan and Associates, and Rick Williams Consulting. I'll be talking about what each of those people brings to the project later. All right, so now for introductions of you all. If yeah.
Marcy,
Sarah?
I just wonder if I should if I should stop sharing so everyone can see each other for the introductions, or is
Yeah,
everyone?
Yeah, that's a good
I
idea.
have the list of
Yeah, great.
everybody. So
Let me
I'd
do
like to
that.
start with Joel.
And Joel is not here tonight, so he's out of town. So
Okay.
to go
Micah, is it Micah? Would you
Yep.
introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. My name is Micah Meskel. I use he, him pronouns. And yeah, my day job, I work on natural resource and environmental justice issues. And so I hope to bring that lens in addition to my interest in affordable housing and active transportation and such.
Thank you. Nicole.
Hi, my name is Nicole Zadeb. I have lived, okay, I just want to make sure my mute was off. I've lived in Milwaukee for going on my 9th year now, and I am a local business owner. I'm a realtor, and so I guess my lens is property owners, homeowners, and potential homeowners for Milwaukee.
Thank you. Renee. Renee, you're on mute.
Is that better?
Yep, we can hear you.
So, hi everyone. My name is Renee, and it's Moog is the pronunciation of the last name. I've lived in Milwaukee since 2003 when my husband and I moved from the East Coast. He was originally from Boring, so he was coming home. I was new to the Portland area. And I have a diverse background in intercultural communications and am a visual artist with photography, photojournalism being what I have done my formal education in. Currently, I'm working for the federal government with the IRS. And so one thing I bring to this is that I am a lot of practice in fastidious research. I think that's going to come in handy. I also have a strong affiliation with diversity and equity issues, and I am personally very interested in making sure that we do what we can to retain our open spaces and our connection to the natural world. It's something that is, for me, a personal issue because I am a gardener, and I think it's critical to our emotional well-being.
Thank you. Next, Sharon.
Hello. I moved to Milwaukee approximately a year and a half ago from Minnesota. My son and daughter-in-law are homeowners and parents here. I am retired as an administrator of health and human services, which means I managed affordable housing and was involved in construction and rehab of affordable housing in the Minneapolis suburbs.
Thank you. Next is Celestina.
Hello, my name is Celestina. I use she pronouns. I have been in Milwaukee for about 5.5 years and in the Portland metro area for about 7.5 years. I have an academic background in sociology and anthropology, so I bring that with me along with my social justice, racial justice, and climate justice bends. And as a day job and a night job, I also am a realtor and have a background in housing. Also used to be a little bit on the construction side of things, and I'm very interested in the interplay of how we create affordable housing opportunities, homeownership opportunities, and retain a lot of our green spaces.
Thank you. Next is Daniel.
I'm Dan Eisenbeis. I use he, him pronouns. I've lived in Milwaukee for 4 years. My educational background is in geography. My current day job is doing government relations work for the city of Portland. I've also done land use and planning and policy work for the Department of Land Conservation and Development at the state, as well as the League of Oregon Cities and 1,000 Friends of Oregon and the Minnesota Department of Transportation. And I was a member of the Comp Plan Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Next is Matthew. Or a cat. Sorry. Matthew? Is Matthew here?
Don't see him on the list.
Okay.
So I don't think so. Nope.
All right, then next is Stefan.
Hi, Marcy. Stefan Lashbrook. I've lived in the Llewellyn neighborhood for more than 20 years. I'm the neighborhood chair here. Was a city planner, community development director, city manager for 45 years. And I know a whole bunch of you. It's so good to see you, Laura.
Hi, Stefan.
Anyway, so obviously I have a lot of background in this stuff. I worked on the Comp Plan Advisory Committee. And anyway, that's enough about me. Let's move on.
Thank you, Stefan. It's nice to see you. Ada. Ada Gonzalez. I think she might not be here too.
I think that's correct. I don't see her on the
Okay.
list.
Dominique. Okay.
Dominique is running late. She had to work late, but she
Okay.
hasn't had a chance to jump in yet. So, yep.
Then we'll move to Eugene. Eugene, can you introduce yourself?
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, thanks.
I'm sorry there's no visual image. I couldn't figure out how to get the camera working so you could all see me, although it did work on meeting number 1 we had, so I don't know what's going on. At any rate, my name's Gene Zahari, and I'm a he, him, his by pronoun, and I've lived in the Milwaukee area for over 20 years over in the Hector Campbell neighborhood, and have followed local government pretty closely. And have been overall just really impressed with city officials and electeds and the responses my wife and I have both gotten with our questions. But my real interest in the last few years has been houselessness, and my wife and I are kind of boots on the ground. We've been volunteering at the winter warming shelters for some time, encourage libraries to make their facilities open during hot weather in the summer for folks seeking respite. And so we also were instrumental at a church, King of Kings Lutheran Church, trying to open up a safe overnight shelter program sponsored by Clackamas County. And that was a real learning experience. We got through 2 conditional approvals from the county as well as a land use judge. But I'll tell you, if you want to put a temporary homeless shelter right smack dab in the middle of a white conservative neighborhood, you're going to run into problems. So I'll just end there. Nice to see you all tonight.
Nice to see you too. Thanks, Eugene. The last person I have on my list is Jennifer. Is Jennifer here?
We can't hear you.
Mary, is Jennifer here?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, you must be muted. Well,
What now?
There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
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 Sorry, I can't hear you guys.
We
But
can
if you
hear
can
you.
hear me,
Yes.
my name is Jennifer, and I have a background in marketing. I worked for 13 years for a nonprofit leading a marketing team. And I now have my master's in real estate development from PSU. And I work in development. My passion and interest is missing middle housing and cottage clusters, which I hope to see come to fruition through this planning process. And I'm excited to be here.
Thank you.
Marcy, we also have some committee members that are members of the Planning Commission and the City Council. So the folks that we just walked through that list are sort of our resident, our non-committee members of the committee, I guess. So we do have Lisa Beatty, Joseph Edge, and Lauren Losvelt are here from the City Council and from the Planning Commission. So maybe Lisa, if you could introduce yourself as well.
Sure. I'm Lisa Beatty. I've lived in Milwaukee for 18 and a half years. I've been on the city council for 5+. And before that, I was on the planning commission for 9.5. So I've been in the planning weeds. I think I'm somebody who should have gone to planning school instead of law school. But anyway, so I'm looking forward to this process. Thanks.
Thank you. Joseph?
I'm Joseph Edge, representing the Planning Commission here on the CPIC, and I actually grew up in the area and went to school at the Milwaukee Junior High, which is now the Waldorf School, and I've been involved in land use advocacy for over 20 years and on the Planning Commission for over 3 years now, and I'm also involved in other endeavors. I'm the chair of the North Clackamas Watersheds Council, and so the perspective I bring, in addition to the Planning Commission, is one from a perspective of environmentalism and conservation, as well as being very detail-oriented about land use policy and urban design.
Lauren?
Hi there. My name is Lauren Losfeld, she, her, hers, and I am an architect by day. I have worked with the Planning Commission as one of the committee members. I'm now the co-chair, vice chair technically. For the last 2 years, I've sat on the committee, and prior was on the Design and Landmarks Committee for 3+ years. I've really enjoyed working on the committees, working in the city, and find a lot of satisfaction in seeing how city of Milwaukee has prospered significantly in the last 7 years that I've been a resident. So looking forward to this process. My passion is in sustainability. As an architect, I was previously a green building advisor, and know the ins and outs of many of the certification frameworks that have led to where we are now, and am very passionate about policy and advocacy at state and federal levels.
I'm going to ask a few other people to introduce themselves too, and that's Peter, Layla, Natalie, and Laura in that order. So Peter, would you introduce yourself?
I'm Peter Passarelli. I'm the Public Works Director. I've been in Milwaukee a little over 3 years. I hope to sort of bring to the group here the lens of climate and natural resources and utilities.
Thank you. Layla?
Hi, Layla Aman. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Milwaukee, and so I oversee the planning, the building, and the community development divisions. I will be sort of serving as a project advisor, so I'll be working a lot with Vera on the project, largely because the CD team also is responsible for implementing the city's goals related to housing. So there's a natural connection there. So I'm happy to be here and look forward to getting to know all of you.
Thanks. Natalie.
Hi there, my name is Natalie Rogers. I'm the Climate Action and Sustainability Coordinator for Milwaukee. My perspective that I'm going to bring here is through the implementation of our climate action plan and the climate goals for our community, as well as other sustainability and environmental goals and interests, including green space connectivity and natural resource preservation. I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
And Laura, welcome.
Hello, hi, I'm Laura Weigel. I'm the very new planning manager, as I have been here for 3 days. So this is great. I was so excited to see that this meeting was happening because it gives me an opportunity to really dive into the comprehensive plan. I've done several comprehensive plans. I did the comprehensive plan update recently for the city of Hillsborough, and prior to that I did the comprehensive plan update for the city of Lake Oswego. So I really enjoy the comprehensive planning process, the implementation process, and getting to know all of the community members who are involved in this process. That's really the part of my job I like the most, so I'm really happy to be here tonight. Thanks for having me. It's nice to meet everyone.
Well, and last, I think the one person that we have not heard from yet is actually from Herbsworks. And I want to just mention that I have 2 people from Herbsworks that will be working on this project. Erica Warhus, who's not here this evening, but you'll meet her. And Pauline, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Pauline. I'll mostly be on mute because I have 2 young children at home. But I'm going to be supporting this project and I'm really excited. I live right on the edge of Milwaukee and my husband works at the Milwaukee Hospital, so we spend a lot of time there. So I'm really excited to get to know even more about the city of Milwaukee.
So thank you for everyone for introducing yourselves. I'm really impressed with this group and I'm looking forward to the conversations that we're going to have through this project. They won't all be easy or uncontroversial for sure, but I think it'll be really great to have all these different perspectives weighing in. So let's move to the next part of the presentation.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen again.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. I assume that worked.
Yep.
Okay, great.
I see it.
Perfect.
All right, so moving on through meeting protocol and introductions. The objectives for this meeting, number 2 of your CPIC set, is to meet as the consulting team, have a basic understanding of the municipal code as it relates to this project, and review and comment on the public engagement strategy, which Kimmy has been working on really hard for the last month and so many days. So we'll be going over that in a little bit more detail after the 101 presentation. We're going to be asking for your feedback and input on those public engagement elements. Like, did we get the general concept right? Are we missing anything in our process? The charge of your committee is to support the city. I won't read all of these, but to support the city, to be primary liaisons to the Milwaukee community. So you're really kind of on the front representing this project. We'll be asking you to interact with City of Milwaukee staff, particularly the planning division and its consultant team. The CPIC will meet monthly about, not exactly, but we'll show you the schedule and we're aiming for a final code package to be adopted in early summer 2021. And that's a very rigorous schedule, but I'm sure we can do it. So the CPIC members are also encouraged to help facilitate meetings with their neighborhood district associations and other community organizations. And this is kind of important as in your role as liaisons, that we're kind of counting on you all to help spread the information and spread out requests for feedback, because this project won't be successful unless we get lots and lots of people informed and involved. And not all of you may be comfortable in that role, but we have tools that can help you, and we'll talk about those more. We'd like you to promote opportunities for public involvement and disperse information to the Milwaukee community generally. Next. So the overall project schedule is shown here. We did start in August. We've been hard at work. You actually, I should say, started in June. So, and we, the consultant team, was brought in August. I'll talk more about what happens in each of these phases, but there are 7 distinct phases, and you'll be meeting about once a month in kind of within each of those phases. Next. So the engagement goals for Milwaukee community generally, I think these have applied to other projects. Improve community participation, have a better informed and resourced community, create great sense of inclusion, reduce real or perceived alienation and marginalization, improve levels of satisfaction and ownership, build an appreciation of local knowledge systems and expertise, and empower the community for social change. Then specifically for this project, these are the goals that Kimmy has helped develop along with the city staff. Take and make as many opportunities for a wide reach of engagement for this project to be successful, because this is the future. This document represents kind of the mother of all documents that's going to guide the future of Milwaukee for generation. Engage the historically underrepresented communities. Focus communications and seek input in this strange time of no contact technique. So I know that's going to be interesting for us, but I think we can all participate still very fully. Communicate information to allow people to provide meaningful input on complex issues. The comprehensive plan and the introduction of middle housing and how you incorporate the goals of increasing tree canopy and parking issues is very complicated, and zoning codes are complicated, and the regulations that you'll need to put into place to implement your comprehensive plan is very complicated, but we have the right group of people here to wade through those and then disseminate and communicate that information to the community. We want to have an open and welcoming process, all of us, and document public input and respond to individual comments. So those of you who are really detail oriented will just love that part. Next. I'm not going to read through this. This is in your packet. I am aware that some of you in this group worked on this statement. I love this vision. It was relatively recently adopted in 2017. So let's just have this here as kind of constant inspiration. I think we'll have a copy of it in the packet every time we communicate with you. I believe that the next part is Vera's.
Okay. So one of the things that we wanted to do from the planning side was to give you a 30-minute orientation into our code, the comp plan, how development review works, so that you have a basis of knowledge of how and how our code works when it relates to housing, parking, and tree preservation, which are the focus of this project, of course. This is sort of high level, but it's also a way of teeing everyone up to the next phase of, or the phase that we're sort of working on right now, but the next part of this project, which is the code audit, which is a process where we're trying to identify conflicts in our code with our established policies for housing, as well as House Bill 2001. So, but to do that, having a better understanding about how our code works basically, and how development review works basically here, we think that's important for you to have some basic information. So Mary and I are going to walk through some of this stuff. We're going to try and keep it as high level as we can while still providing you with the detail that you need, and give you a resource for where you can explore this in a little more detail. Okay, so you're gonna be planners in 30 minutes, so sit tight. Okay, Mary.
Okay. So I'm kind of bringing you back to kind of where we all started. As Marcy mentioned, the vision, the community vision was a one-year process that happened in 2016 and 2017. I know some of you were involved in that process way back then, so yay you for staying with us. And the community vision is intended to be a very high-level vision of what Milwaukee is going to be in 20 years. And so as you read that vision, you kind of get that sense. It's very aspirational, pie in the sky kind of thing, but that's the goal that we're trying to reach. So when we were doing the comprehensive plan in 2018, we started that with that vision in mind, and that's the point. That's how this works in general for all cities in Oregon. Typically, this is the process they go through. So the comprehensive plan is then meant to create policies that pertain to that vision. And so the comprehensive plan that we recently adopted back in August, yay us, it has 13 different sections, 13 different chapters that are meant to meet that vision that we set ourselves back in 2017 with. So now we are at the point where we're wanting to implement the comprehensive plan policy document. So that means we are going to be creating design and development standards, where land uses can go, and by the term land use, I'm going to assume not everyone knows what that means. Land use is basically anything that can be built or something that you physically see, I think is maybe a good way of putting it. And so what we're going to do now is having to get down into the nitty-gritty, taking those policies that came from the comprehensive plan adoption process and actually writing detailed code that's going to give somebody an idea of how they need to develop, how they need to build housing, how they need to build anything really. That's what the code is for. The policies are, again, going to be in the comp plan. They're, again, very general. Now we're in the specifics, and so that's where we are right now. So we're going to talk to you about what the land use code kind of looks like, how it functions now, and also where we're already seeing gaps. So Vera and I work in the code every single day. We know already where some of those gaps are, and we know where there are barriers that we already see in terms of needing to meet these policies that we set forth in the comp plan. So next slide, Vera. All right, so the comprehensive plan also designates where land uses can go by categories. And in a visual way you can see here is the map. The bright yellow that you see is low density. That covers 50% of our community. Low density is a residential designation, as well as moderate and medium and high density. Those are all residential. And then we have commercial, commercial mixed use, industrial, public, and town center designations. And so this is kind of to let people know, and you can go to the next slide, Vera. This is to let people know where different land uses can go in the city. Obviously, you're going to want to be careful about where industrial uses are going to go. Usually, we want to keep them away from neighborhoods or residential uses because of the noise, sound, and also smell, different things that they do that aren't really the best to have right adjacent next to a residential use. So that's why the maps exist, and so we want to dictate where different uses go in the city. Now, when we're going to the land use code, we have zones. And these zones fall under the different comp plan categories. As you can see here, we have quite a few zones. And the zones represent different types of land uses too, to make it even more complicated. So for example, if you look at the industrial zones column, there's 4 different implementing zones there. BI is business industrial. If you've ever been to like the International Way area, that's zoned for BI, which is kind of more meant to zone corporate offices, buildings that do, Bob's Red Mill is over there, if you know where that is. So they kind of do like a combination of like sometimes retail, but they produce something, or they are an office space for a corporation or things like that. The M zone is manufacturing zone, and that's allows totally different uses. It's more for like the people that are making things. They're really like getting in there and like making the products that come out of Milwaukee. So obviously the business industrials uses that are allowed are going to be different than what's allowed in the M zone, but they all still fall under that industrial zones category. So that's why different zones fall in a single category. The different zones do allow and do dictate how different types of developments are made. You'll also notice that we have 4 different residential zones, so low density to high density. Obviously, low density, you're going to see kind of bigger lots, less amounts of housing on one street. And then higher density obviously is going to usually be closer to commercial areas, closer to downtown areas, those kinds of places where you're going to see more transit access, things like that. So that's kind of a good understanding of how the comprehensive plan designations are then create implementation zones. And so we're going to be dealing with these implementation zones. We're going to be in the R10, we're going to be in the R2 zone, kind of updating those codes. And I think that's all I have for that slide.
Okay.
And the viewer's going to go into that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mary. So as she pointed out, we're going to be living here in the residential zones for this project as we're working with housing. The fact that we have 8 different residential zones, that's a lot of zones for housing development in our city, and way that translates into the code. And I think what I'm going to do here is I want to show you the code itself. So here's the city's website. And I want to show you how the code is organized. You can go to the municipal code. Title 19 is zoning. Again, this is where we're going to be living for the bulk of this project. And we're in the base zones, so low density residential zones and the medium and high density residential zones. And so this is how the code generally is organized for the residential zones. And so you see here our low density residential zones, R10, R7, R5. And here's how the code is organized for what kinds of uses are permitted. Again, residential, single family, duplex, accessory dwelling units, senior and retirement housing. This is how the code is organized by what is allowed. And then we go down to how does it have to be built? So I'm going to scoot over here really quick to show you the development standards. So when we talk about development standards, we mean things like how large does a lot have to be developed? How wide does the lot have to be? How deep? What are the setbacks for the property? So this is how things are built. These are the rules that govern how structures are built on these properties. And what you can see is, first of all, we have a bunch of different residential zones, which makes it really complicated. And then we have a variety of lot sizes depending on what you're building. So part of this project is going to be really sussing out, are these the right zones? Are these the right size? Is this the right way that we want to be developing residential in light of our established policies from the comp plan, as well as the requirements from House Bill 2001, but also taking a look at, is there a way to simplify how the code works? It's really complicated for people to just understand what are the rules that apply to my property. So this is how our development standards kind of work out. And as you can see, there's a lot happening here. We are also talking about, and this is just sort of a basic understanding of how lot, as an example, how is lot width measured? It's measured at the building line. What are yards, what are setbacks? The yard is everything that's in front of the building, side yard is to the side, the rear yard is to the rear. And then your minimum setbacks, as we understood here, are what is the minimum amount of space between the property line and the building. And so again, it's a variety depending on what zone you're in, what kind of density does the zoning call for. We have several other standards, many other standards in the zoning code. For example, we have standards about flag lots. This is an example of a flag lot. I've outlined it here in red, but a flag lot is literally in the shape of a flag. That's why it's called that. So we have other development standards related to residential development, not just sort of the house and the setbacks, but it's also the lots themselves. So we have specific standards about flag lots and how they're measured and how the area is measured and how that works. So this is a flag lot that was developed on what was once a larger parent lot, and then a flag lot was developed so that a house could be built behind. We have several neighborhoods in the city that have multiple flag lots on a street. In fact, this one here, you can see there are 3 in a row, but predominantly we do have a lot of these kinds of lots in the Ardenwald neighborhood, where that was divided and developed many, many years ago into narrow, deep lots. So they have really large backyards, but they're fairly narrow on the street, 72 to 75 feet wide. We also have development standards that apply to residential development as it relates to off-street parking, which is another part of this project. Single-family homes, as an example, are required to have a minimum of 1 off-street parking space. But our code requires that that off-street parking space be outside your front yard setback. So if you remember in our development standards, minimum front yard setback is 20 feet or 15 feet for the bulk of our lots, but that means that that off-street parking space can't be in that setback. What that means is that we essentially require homes to have a garage or a side yard where you can park the car for you to be in compliance with the off-street parking standard. And that comes up a little bit later to kind of tie that into what can be considered a potential barrier to development. And then, so we have our standards, but we also have a land use review process for development. And those fall into 2 different categories. Permitted outright, where it's just permitted outright, you go immediately to a building permit. For the most part, that's where single family homes fall in our code from a residential standpoint. You have clear and objective standards, like here's what the setback is, here's what you need to have this percentage of windows on the wall that faces the street. It's basic. I kind of think of it as math. It's just basic standards. It either is or it isn't. And state law requires communities to have clear and objective standards for what they call needed housing, which is essentially all housing. So we have to have clear and objective standards in order to develop residential development in the city. And this is different from discretionary review, which is the kind of review that has approval criteria. That's not math. It's not a standard that it either is or it isn't. It's the kind of review that has words like compatibility or generally consistent or minimize impacts. So it's the kind of thing that you could ask 5 people if a development is generally consistent with the surrounding neighborhood, and you might get 5 different answers. So what that means is that as an applicant, you don't know if it actually meets it or not. And that's problematic because there isn't certainty in the development, and it increases the cost of a project for a land use review, and it takes a lot of time. So that's another thing that we need to think about in this project is what is the review process for our various residential types. So if we kind of come back over to the code again, hello. Let's go back up to our low density development. And so what you can see in our table in our code is that a P is for permitted. So a single family home is just permitted outright in these zones. So you can go, you have a lot, you want to build a house on it, you go straight to building permit. And we just verify that it meets all of the development standards. But what we might do for a duplex, for example, it is permitted in the R5 zone if it meets certain standards. But there's also this Roman numeral 2, that's a type 2 land use review process. So depending on the location of your duplex or of the lot, you may need to go through a discretionary review process to get a permit for that duplex. And that means that it needs to meet certain approval criteria. Again, we're back to there isn't certainty that it's going to meet the standards. It's a discretionary review. The applicant doesn't know necessarily if they're going to get their permit or not. So that's the kind of uncertainty that we want to make sure that we try to minimize if we can through the code. And then you'll see different things in our code like CU, that's a conditional use. Any use that's labeled with a CU as the review process means it's going to the Planning Commission for a type 3 review. That's a super discretionary process. There are approval criteria, but it's a discretionary review. It's not clear and objective that I meet these standards, I get my permit. You're going to have to go through, jump through some hoops to be able to build something like that. Okay. So we've got standards, we have development review, and one of the other things that we're identifying as part of this process is the lack of tree code for private property. So while we have a review process for subdivisions, for duplexes, for multifamily residential, that's the MFR on properties, what we don't have, and so what you won't find in the code is a tree code for private property. So we don't have standards or any kind of a code that talks about either preserving existing trees on a site as part of your development project, nor do we have requirements to plant new trees as part of your development. The only tree code we have currently that applies in the city is for trees on public property in the right-of-way, or if your property is mapped as a natural resource area. But if it's not, then we don't have any code to regulate the trees, either keeping trees or planting new trees as part of the development. So that's part of this project as well, because we have this goal, we have a goal of 40% tree canopy in the city. So we're adding that into the mix of what is already a complicated stew of regulations. And then finally, we just wanted to chat quickly about some real-world examples of what we have found in our years here working in the planning department of some of these development standards, design standards, review processes that our code currently has. Again, we started a code audit. We provided a foundation to the consultant team to look through our code and identify all of the places where our code is in conflict with either the policies of our comprehensive plan or with the requirements of House Bill 2001 requiring middle housing and to be allowed in our code. For example, accessory dwelling units in the city, land use review is always required for an ADU. Even if it meets all of the standards, which we have standards for them, even if it meets the standards, there's still a land use review required. You can't just go to a building permit, even if you meet all of the standards from the code. What our code also does is it does not recognize an existing structure. So for example, if you had an existing accessory building on your property, maybe you have a second garage or something, and you wanted to convert that garage into a residential unit, into an ADU, the code has limitations on how big that building can be. So even if you had, a garage, and this happened to an applicant a few years ago, their garage was 40 square feet larger than what the maximum size is for the structure for an ADU. The entire ADU is not going to be in that structure. It was only going to be a portion of it, but because the overall structure was 40 square feet larger than the maximum of 800 square feet, they had to go to the Planning Commission for a variance. So it's just adding another layer of requirement. The ADU itself was only going to be, I think, 600 square feet, which very very easily met the standards for the proportion of an ADU, but because the parent structure, the actual garage was too big, they had to go to the Planning Commission for a type 3 variance, and that was a $2,000 application fee, and I think it took more than 2 months to go through the process. So that's just an illustration of how our code is kind of set up to kind of throw some roadblocks into processes. Mary, do you want to talk about the triplex versus the row house really quick?
Yeah, sure. So row houses. You don't see a lot of row houses in Milwaukee, and there's a specific reason for that, because our code is pretty complicated in terms of how to build row houses in Milwaukee. We've actually had some people try and do it, and it ended up, they couldn't do it. It didn't work with the lot size. So for example, in the R2 zone, which is one of our high density zones, minimum lot size is for, if you're building a single family home, is 5,000 square feet. If you want to put in 2 row houses, it's 7,500 square feet. And for a high density area where it's going to be, lots are going to be smaller, typically 7,500 square feet is a significant chunk of land for somebody. And then if you want to put in 3, it's 10,000 square feet. I mean, we don't have a lot of 10,000 square foot lots in a high density zone. And then if you want to put 4, which is the maximum you can do to cluster together row houses, it's 12,500 square feet. So it's pretty complicated. It's hard to build row houses in Milwaukee. And again, so we've had people run into those issues. So somebody decided to build a triplex instead of row houses. And the reason they wanted to do the row house option was because row houses are allowed and can be on separate lots. So even though the walls are connected, they're still on their own separate lots. It makes it a lot easier to sell them. And so that people can actually buy a townhome and know that it is their property that they've bought. But they instead had to do a triplex, which still ended getting them to Planning Commission for some other standards that we have around multifamily housing. And it just made it a little bit more complicated for them to get that approval in the end. It still came out with a nice triplex in a high density area, but it wasn't something that they could do easily and figure out how to do easily as well. We had to have multiple meetings with them and kind of try and figure out what were the best options for them.
Great, thank you. Quick example here on the flag lots. So again, we have a lot of narrow and deep lots in the city that could accommodate an extra house or another house in the back. But our flag lot standards, our design standards, are pretty cumbersome for folks to be able to meet. For example, in fact, this flag lot is an old one, and this flag lot would not be able to be developed under today's code. Today's code requires that the pole itself be 25 feet wide, and that's pretty wide for the driveway. Our code also requires that the minimum lot size for the zone be accommodated here in the flag itself. The pole does not count towards the minimum lot size. So the flag lot itself always, of course, is larger than the minimum lot size. And we also have some design standards within the flag itself. For the house, we have extra large setbacks. For the house, both the front and rear yard setback are 30 feet, no matter the zone you're in. And our side yard setbacks are 10 feet. So they're substantially larger generally than the base zone that they're in. And what our code does not allow are variances for the flag lot itself, for its size, the area, or anything like that. So there are extra barriers for creating flag lots in our code. And then finally, because of, as I mentioned, the off-street parking needing to be outside the front yard setback, what that has resulted in are folks or what we've been seeing a lot of are folks trying to convert their existing attached garage into a living space. So expanding that into a family room or something like that. And we've ended up with variances for those properties because they can't accommodate, they can't figure out how they are losing their existing legal off-street parking space by basically taking out the garage for parking. So what our code effectively does is requires 2 off-street parking spaces for a single family home. It's not just 1. So everyone has their driveway plus the garage as your 2 parking spaces. And that can be really difficult for properties to accommodate in that case. So what we wanted to do was sort of give you sort of a snapshot of what our code looks like, kind of how the review process works, the standards, just kind of how things are organized, and how the code itself is what implements the comprehensive plan, which is the policies set up from the vision statement. So it all kind of aligns. And so what we're working on here tonight, as you know, is the housing code, off-street parking, as well as trees. And how do we put all of that stuff together to meet the policies set out by our comprehensive plan, as well as the requirements of House Bill 2001. And I'm going to stop sharing. So you're all planners now, 30 minutes.
You'll have your degree. Woo! I know Celestina had a question to begin with, if we want to start with her.
Sure.
Do you want me to say it, or do you want?
You can go ahead and say it, whatever you want.
Sure. Okay. I was just wondering, Vera, or anyone who may want to answer, where the decision, or it sounds like priority, came from to try and eliminate as much as possible the discretionary categories, or I don't know what the label for them is, but the type 2 and type 3 review processes. It sounds like there's been a decision to try and avoid those. And I understand that they are cumbersome and can be expensive and can be obstructive to some kinds of development. However, I'm wondering if there are any advantages to them and any cases where we might want them. And I was just hoping for a little bit more information.
Sure, I'll take a stab at that. I think it's not that we've been trying to avoid, discretionary review certainly has a place. I think a classic example are the uses that we have that are community service uses. An example of that would be a church that wanted to locate in a residential zone. So it's so as a community service use, it's permitted in a residential zone, but it needs to go through a discretionary process to make sure that it meets certain performance standards, minimizing impacts. It works, but there needs to be an additional level of review, including a public review, to make sure that we're identifying all of the potential impacts for a project like that. I think what we're trying to get at with the clear and objective standards, first of all, that state law requires that there be clear and objective standards for residential development. That's a priority in state law, that we be able to do that. We have clear and objective standards for single family development. We have clear and objective standards for multifamily development as well, but you can opt for a more discretionary review process, for example, in multifamily development, if instead of having to provide, as an example, 50 square feet of private open space per unit, you can show that you're providing sufficient open space in your development. And so it's discretionary because it's not a measurable kind of standard. And so, but you want more flexibility. So in that case, that's why we would go there. But I think part of what we're trying to balance, certainly, is the ability to, review a project, make sure that it, it meets our standards. But I think part of what we're trying to do too is write standards that will result in the projects that we like, and not necessarily have to continually go through a discretionary process, because there is very little guarantee. There's really no way to know kind of where you're going to come out from there. So we're trying to balance the two. There are definitely advantages to a discretionary process for certain things, but there's a place for a clear and objective process for other uses as well. I don't know if I answered your question, but there's room for both, of course, but we are trying to strive for a clear and objective process for housing, for residential development, as required by state law as well.
Yeah, and another thing I'll add to that too is different zones. You can make clear and objective standards for different types of residential uses based on the zone too. So a higher density zone, obviously you're probably going to want to have more clear and objective standards for those higher end, like larger developments, such as triplexes, fourplexes, those types of things. But you may not have the same type of clear and objective standards for those types of uses in your low density zone. you know? So just because I guess clear and objective standards by the state law doesn't mean that we have to allow all residential uses everywhere in the city. They all have to have that, you know, really easy review process. We can, as city officials, dictate where we want to have those different residential uses have clear and objective standards. So it's not just kind of like a free-for-all sort of thing.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'll just add one more piece of context from the comprehensive plan advisory committee process, that there was lots of brainstorming around the idea that discretionary review processes could potentially give the city an opportunity to kind of negotiate on getting additional community-oriented outcomes from a project in exchange for, you know, a variance on setback. And so that to me is an intriguing way to get at some of our goals. That's all. But thank you for your answers. That makes sense.
No, and you're right. A variance definitely is a discretionary review, but you're asking for an exception to the code in that case, which is absolutely appropriate for that to be a discretionary review. So, yep, you're right. Joseph, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I had a question related to the needed housing statutes and the need for clear and objective standards that basically at this point are found to apply to all housing and on all lands committed to housing use already. So given that statute and LUBA and Court of Appeals decisions around this, when there's a conflict between a land that is committed to a residential use and already has housing and therefore meets the definition of needed housing, but then the use is proposed to be intensified with additional dwellings, but there's a conflict with other goals for that same land, including goal 5 for natural resources, goal 6 for natural hazards, those kinds of things. How do we have ideas for how our code will approach clear and objective housing for lands committed to a housing use that are on lands that are identified as serving, you know, being allocated to meet these other goals in state land use planning?
I'm wondering why you're asking that question, Joseph. It sounds like maybe we'd experienced that at one point. And for context for everyone else, there was a residential development was proposed on properties near the Willamette River with mapped natural resources as well as the floodplain. So it was a complicated site, a complicated project. At the end of the day, the project was approved with significantly fewer residential units on it. It went from 12 to 5. So that's sort of the short answer of that. Joseph, it's a great question. There are some communities in the region that have code that is specific to creating clear and objective standards for natural resource areas. So that's part of our charge for this project, is to figure out how to combine these things. Of course, our city attorney is part of our internal review team to help us make sure that we're covering that correctly. So that the answer I'm going to give you is that it's on the top of our list of things of how to figure this out. That project, Elk Rock Estates, came at a time where, we knew then that we need to approach this in our code and figure out how we're going to address this later. And so between floodplain and natural resources, we will absolutely be looking at that here in the city as well. So that's our goal, is to obviously comply with state law while also recognizing that we have critical resources that we want to make sure that we protect. So my answer is a non-answer, except that we know, and it's already on our list, and city attorney's already been queued up to help us figure that out. So thank you very much. Thanks for that. I think we have one more. Marcy, how are we doing on time? I just wanted to make sure that we're not.
I think we could take a couple of more questions.
Okay.
And I think Eugene, and I see Renee have questions. So Eugene, go ahead.
Oh, I have a quick one. Joseph mentioned natural resource areas. And when I was looking at some information, it said that those areas are not on the map. In other words, they weren't included in just an overview of the Milwaukee area. And I was wondering why that is.
I'm not sure I understand your question. Our natural resources are mapped. It's a layer on our natural resources map. So yes, so our mapped natural resource areas are on a map, and those are subject to our section 402 of our zoning code. So we have a section of code specific to development in our natural resource areas.
Yeah, perhaps I'm mistaken, but I thought I specifically read that those areas were not included in a map that was used as a resource for us to look at. But I could be wrong.
Okay, I can follow up with you on that offline if that's okay. But we do have all of our natural resource areas have been mapped, and they are a layer on our zoning map.
Thank you. That's good to know.
Maybe you can show them how to get to our online maps on the website, because you can see everything online. It's pretty great.
Okay.
And while you're doing that, Vera, we can ask Renee to ask her question.
Mm-hmm.
So despite the brief training we just received, I'm not a planner. So my question is taking a bigger step back to try to understand the context of this discussion. And it starts off with the reference to the project. So I feel like I'm missing a beat here. I understand based on the discussion that the project is, as we're talking about it, is housing, parking, and tree canopy. But how did that come to be the project? And are there more than one projects that are going to form, that are going to be in succession to form the bigger picture?
Okay, so the project is housing. That is one of the highest priority goals for City Council. So we received marching orders essentially from City Council that the first step for implementation of our comprehensive plan was going to be focused on housing. But related to housing is sort of these other ideas of, how does off-street parking relate to housing development? Is it a barrier to housing development? So that's included, as well as we have our climate action plan and our urban forestry plan, and our climate action goal of achieving a tree canopy of 40% in the city. But those things could, in some ways, be in conflict, right? We want to encourage more development, but we also want to preserve trees or have a greater tree canopy. So how do we work those together? So that's why parking and trees are connected to housing as part of this code project. But implementing our comprehensive plan policies related to housing opportunities we were given that direction from the City Council as one of their highest goals. Layered in with that was the passage of House Bill 2001 from the state legislature in 2019, which is requiring communities in Oregon to revise their codes to include middle housing and to allow middle housing in their codes. So we've got two things. We've got the state and we have the City Council telling us we need to do this. It's a priority for the city. So that's why we're doing what we're doing. That's the project, our code amendments to implement
There are vis-a-vis the CPIC and also any kind of paperwork that comes out of this. I think it would be helpful if there was a name that wasn't generic. When you talk about the project, it's like if it was like, I don't know what, phase 1 project or something.
It is technically called that. Yeah. But so maybe we need to be calling it phase 1 more so than project.
So for me, trying to understand, what, without going off into really detailed something or way off on a tangent, it would be helpful for me to understand the context that I'm putting forth any ideas within. So first of all, the time frame that's set out and the consultancy contract is for what you're calling the project, or
phase 1.
Phase 1. Mm-hmm. And is there already established a longer time frame with X number of phases? And is CPIC eventually going to do something besides phase 1?
I think that's something that we will all be, I mean, this is to implement the comprehensive plan, there will be multiple phases of code amendments. This is the first phase. I think the future of CPIC and who is on it and kind of how all this works is something that we will all be talking about, you know, as this project progresses. But phase one are this section of code amendments for the duration of this project, as Marcy was laying out. So in the early summer, we will have a package of code amendments at City Council that relate to housing, trees, and off-street parking as part of this phase. Yeah.
And what if discussion about business as it relates to zoning or open spaces or other things come up that we think is part and parcel of the discussion? Is it a valid topic to be able to include, or are we staying completely on topic?
I think for the most part, my answer will be that we need to stay on topic for this. We don't, I mean, this is it's a pretty aggressive schedule. I think what we would want to hear is, you know, what are we thinking on these other things, but we would be tabling those conversations till another phase of development. For example, the neighborhood hubs, you know, that idea of the neighborhood hubs that came up a lot, that's going to be a set of code amendments. That's going to come as its own separate project. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We need to stay pretty on topic here for this project.
And what we can do, which I know the CPAC also has suggested this as well, is kind of just start creating a list as we're talking about things, and you're thinking, oh, I want to make sure that we think about this during that next phase or something like that. We can just definitely start creating a document that's just listing all of these things out. So if you think of something, but it's not quite about housing or it's not quite about parking, but you want to make sure that we get it down, we can definitely do that.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
There are a couple of questions and comments here in the chat. I just want to go through those, and then Marcy will continue on with the application. So for Eugene, there have been some disputes about how the natural resources have been mapped on our map, to be fair, how they're mapped on the ground. However, they are mapped, and I'm actually going to show you where they are on our zoning map, just so you can see kind of what's happening here. And then another question to Renee, there are other projects, for example, the transportation system plan will be updated. That's going to be a project. So we're going to be doing code amendments or some kind of implementation project probably for the next 10 years is my guess at this point, probably. And then there was a question about the House bill for a timeline as part of the requirements. So we will be required to have our code amendments updated as part of the House bill requirements by 2022. We're going to be ahead because it's in line with this. We also have received a grant from the state to help implement this and as part of our code amendment project. So hope that answers your question. And Eugene, I can just really quickly show you our zoning map or our city map. This is our zoning map, but there's a layer that talks about our natural resources. So you can see sort of on our city map that we have our wetlands. Wetlands are mapped, our water quality resource areas are mapped, and our habitat conservation areas are mapped. So we do have a map for those.
Does that appear on map 5?
Vera, are you sharing your screen? Are you trying to?
Oh.
Yeah, I don't see it. Yeah.
There it is. Sorry. I forgot there's an extra step for share. It doesn't know that I really mean it. So I have to hit the extra button. So this is on our zoning map. So the natural resources are mapped as part of our zoning map. And so Eugene, I'm wondering if you're actually asking about our comprehensive plan maps as opposed to our zoning maps.
Yeah, because our comprehensive plans don't have these natural resources.
The comprehensive plan maps don't have these, right? This is part of our zoning maps. Yeah.
Would that be map 5?
Map 5 those are the comprehensive plan maps. So the zoning map is not part of the comprehensive plan. The comp plan are the land use maps. The zoning map implements the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
So, but I'm happy to follow up with you in excruciating detail if you would like. I'm happy to do that.
I think that's adequate for now.
Okay.
Vera. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Also, Stefan made a really good comment in our chat function that natural resource boundaries can change over time. So sometimes we need to update our mapped natural resources because they literally change.
Yes,
true.
Yes, they do. Okay. All right. Marcy, we ready to? Oh, Joseph, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just really quick. Was curious if we had enough guidance from the state yet for the rulemaking on House Bill 2001 to know what our flexibility is in terms of the triplexes, quadplexes, and more intense housing, middle housing in the residential, the low density residential zones. And so there is duplexes I know are required on every lot, but there's some flexibility. And so do we know what that flexibility is for us yet? So that we can include that in our decision making.
Yes, absolutely. So DLCD has released their proposal for their model code and their and amendments to the rules themselves, to the OAR. Public hearings are starting on those at the end of this month. And those will be going forward. They're expecting LCDC thinks that they may be able to be taking a vote on those in November. So our timing on this project is actually really good because we're sort of running parallel with that rulemaking process as well. So, yeah.
Are you finished with that glass? I'm going to run the dishwasher. Okay.
Okay. Marcy, should I continue over to their presentation?
Can I go through the what happens when and who is involved how?
Okay.
Thank you, Vera.
You bet.
So I want to give you a big overview of the trajectory of this phase of the project, this phase of implementing the comprehensive plan. So I think Renee made a good point about what is the project. This is not the end all. This is just a way of very opportunistically working in implementation of the middle housing while also updating our comprehensive plan. So what happens when is shown on this graphic. We have the code audit analysis is happening now. Then there will be these code concept developments, and that is an idea about testing out different approaches to implementation of middle housing that deals with trees, parking, and housing, and issues of compatibility and clear and objective standards, and kind of a whole bundle of things. Excuse me, I think the smoke is getting to me. And that will be a way of testing in kind of real prototype housing examples that are easy to understand how these different rules would actually say, look and feel on different kinds of lots and different kinds of neighborhoods in Milwaukee. That's what the code concepts phase is about. Then we go into taking that, we will be relying upon this committee to formalize that information so that then we go into phase 4 or task 4, just community review, take the ideas that we've developed with you out to the broader community. That task 2, 3, and 4 then set us up for drafting the amendments and the process of reconciling them with the comprehensive plan and final amendments to be adopted. So that's the general sequence of events. The green diamond shapes are your meetings that we're having with you. We're on number 2 right now. The orange asterisk is public meetings or public events, which in this COVID era are really going to be things that take place online. There are special joint work sessions. Those are a little bit hard to distinguish. They're outlined with a brown line, and they're basically CPIC number 4 and CPIC number 8. And that's where we will have this committee all together with members of the Landmarks and Planning Commission. Sorry if I don't have the exact name of your commission correct. And the members of the Tree Commission and some others. So those would be really robust and very much planned and facilitated work sessions where we'll be asking all of you to weigh in together on issues. And the public events are then kind of sprinkled throughout so that we can deliver to the public in these 3 points, 3 milestones, the information that we've developed with your help. There's there really should be a lot of loops drawn in this diagram because every meeting produces information that will come back to as feedback to inform the next step. Let me see if I missed anything. The 3 public events will be focused on the first one about housing choices. So kind of a 101 like Vera just gave you about zoning, but about housing choices and what middle housing is and what the House Bill 2001 is all about and the history of housing and exclusionary zoning and rules. And so that'll be a very big bunch of information. The second public event is community review and testing of the code concepts. So we'll be talking about the code concepts themselves, but also how we get community review on them. And then the third public event will be focused on the actual code amendments that we're proposing. Next. I think I'm supposed to turn it over to Kimmy here. Is that true, Kimmy?
Sure.
Okay.
So as part of the all of the community outreach, the CPIC has a role that we would like you to play it. And Marcy mentioned it earlier when we were talking about the charter and kind of the big picture role, but specifically related to outreach and getting the word out about the project. We would like to ask your help in making sure that the public knows about this project and participates in the project, because we know there's a lot of people out there who don't necessarily have it in the past and may not find it important to engage with these government processes, but so we really would like your help in making that happen. So the first thing for your role in outreach is to attend and participate in these meetings like you've done tonight, which is great. Then be champions of the project and spread the word to people, just letting people know that it's happening, explaining to people what middle housing is, because a lot of people that term doesn't mean anything. Just kind of let people know this is going on. And then when we do the public events, whether they be virtual open houses or going to different groups or just having information out there, and we will be doing some community surveys to get feedback from the public, telling people about that, sharing it with your friends, putting it on your Facebook page, sharing it with your different networks would be really helpful in order to get a really robust participation for the project. And then towards about halfway through the project, I believe it's when we're doing the typologies and the concepts, we'll be doing something called a meeting in the box, where we will be creating, especially in this time when we can't go and have big meetings with people or anything, we'll be creating these meetings in a box where we will have all of the information that needs to be out to the public and get their feedback from them. And so we'll be asking you, if you're comfortable, to share those and be like a facilitator with a meeting in a box. So whether it's at your neighborhood association, or even if it's just a group of your friends, to share the project and get your feedback from them. That's or if you're part of a chamber or a realtors group or something, to just share the information with people who would be interested to get their feedback in the process. And everything will be laid out, and we will talk to you about that well before it happens and kind of do a little training so you know how to do it. But sometimes people are more receptive to having their friend or someone they know tell them about the project than a consultant. And then as far as just general community engagement, the first steps in the strategy that we're working on is to develop the community engagement strategy, which outlines all of the different ways we'll be reaching out to the public. Conducting some stakeholder interviews with about 8 to 10 people, just to get a sense of kind of what the issues are in Milwaukee, kind of what how people are thinking about housing, about parking, and just so we know how to then frame the messaging of the project, and we make sure that we talk about the issues that are important to people, so that we're we're kind of, on the same wavelength with people instead of talking about something that they may not find as important. We want to make sure that this project resonates with folks. And then also we'll be creating a project website that has all the information about the project, so people will have a place to go when they hear about it. So those are kind of the big first steps before we get to that first virtual public meeting. And then when we're talking about who's involved in the project, we just wanted to kind of share with you who's involved and how people are involved, because it's really different levels of involvement for folks. So we've got the project management team, which is city staff and the consultant team. So it's project management team and the technical team. We'll be having discussions, kind of talking behind the scenes and getting into the details. And then we'll bring issues and topics to the CPIC to talk about and help us work through some of those issues. And your role is as advisory. So you're making recommendations to the planning commissioners, and then the planning commissioners will make a formal recommendation to the city council, where all of this will ultimately get approved. And then after that, we've got 3 different groups, and kind of the level there is the different level of involvement and interest that people have. So if we've got a group of stakeholders, who are people who are like the development community, affordable housing advocates, the realtors, folks who are really involved, environmental groups, who really have specific questions and are kind of following this in more detail. And so we'll want to make sure to work with them and then make sure that they are aware of opportunities to provide input and do provide input. So they're kind of the ones that, they understand a little more of the technical stuff. And then we've got another layer here that's kind of an interested parties group. And that's a group that is similar to the general public, except that we're targeting communication to them. So it's groups that may not have been involved in the past. So, the historically groups that are underrepresented, we want to be able to reach out to them and make sure that they have an opportunity to provide input and kind of take this project, go an extra step and make sure that they know about it and are providing feedback. And that's kind of where the meeting in the box comes in, because we figure that's a way to get more people involved. And we can kind of, if we're all working on that, then it's a way to kind of spread the resources and get them involved. And then the general public would be involved with things like the community survey, the open house, they would get notices of that, going to the website to get information. So basically for them, it's kind of that higher level public involvement, awareness of the project. It's more the education and informing them of what's going on. So the next slide. So Marcy, I think this goes back to you with how all of the different groups are working together.
Yes. The main focus of the second meeting has been for the consultant team to tell you about the community engagement strategy. I'm going to touch on briefly how the technical team is involved in the project, kind of in the background, because they will be coming forward at the next meeting. So this is a chance for me to give a little bit more of an introduction of the technical team members whom I named earlier. There's my team, Marcy, me, Erica, Warhus, and Pauline. Kimmy Sloop will be managing the public engagement strategy. And then these other 4 members, Keith Leiden, a planner who will be helping look at the comprehensive plan and code amendments all the way through the project. We have Jim Hankey and some others at David Evans and Associates who will be looking at natural resources specifically, and how we make sure that we can integrate our goals for housing and parking and some of the more built environment type of things with natural resources goals. There's a comprehensive plan tree canopy policy and how we implement that while we are actually introducing more forms of middle housing and all of those. We actually have a arborist on the team, and that's Todd Prager of Terragan and Associates. And then looking at parking policy and implementation, we have Rick Williams from Rick Williams Consulting. We think these issues are so intertwined and so complicated by themselves that that's why we have this team, so that we can really dig into specific policies that might apply to different kinds of contexts, different physical situations, different neighborhoods. And we actually have people who are familiar with policy and implementation of different programs. So you'll see in this little cartoon of colors, these the way I think about this project and the technical team is that we have amendments, which is a yellow bar kind of running constantly through the project. We're constantly looking at how to draft the regulatory amendments that are going to implement the vision and the comprehensive plan. We have a team that's looking at the housing, but we also have a team that's looking specifically at the tree issues. They come into kind of forward. That's why their little bubble is bigger at the concept development phase and bigger in the draft amendments phase, because that will be Todd, and he'll be working on both understanding the policies and then understanding the implementing ordinances. Similarly, Rick Williams will have a role on parking in that way. And the community engagement, which is the orange kind of series of bars across the bottom, that is constantly moving forward, but it has its bigger moments, especially during the community reviews phase and during the reconciliation phase. But our job behind the scenes is to weave all of these different team members' skills together and work closely with staff, and we'll be bringing you much more information about their work at the next meeting. Next. So now we want to talk to you about the public engagement plan that we've presented and have a facilitated discussion about, did we get this right? Have we missed anything? And I think we're going to go through this list kind of like we went through introductions. Maybe the first person who raises their hand we'll start with, and then we'll go from there. Is there anybody who has a comment kind of ready? I'm sorry, I don't see, I've turned away. Oh, okay, let's go to Renee first, and then we can go to Councillor Beatty. And then we'll go through the list.
So my question is, are there any overarching guidelines that we're using with public engagement having to do with diversity and equity? And if so, when are they coming into play and what are they?
I can start answering with that. So Marcy went over at the beginning the goals of the community outreach program and the city's goals. And included in both of those is making sure that there are opportunities for a wide reach of engagement and to engage the historically underrepresented communities, to have more diversity in the outreach. So basically every single step along the way, when we're looking at the different outreach opportunities, we will be asking that question. How are we making sure that we get a broad representation of the public? And that diversity includes, you know, different races, different incomes, the whole kind of gamut of diversity. So we're not just looking at one group. We're not defining, we're taking a wide definition of diversity and making sure that we talk to different folks. So we will take, if you have any recommendations of groups of people to talk to or individuals, please let us know to make sure that we're not missing anything, or if there's any, the other part of this, that we want to make sure that we are very welcoming in the meetings and the language we use. So if you've got any comments about that, we will gladly take that and make sure that we address that in the documents we produce. We will also be translating these meeting minutes into Spanish, as well as the open houses and the other documents that go out to the public, because we'll be creating some fact sheets and some information about those public meetings. Those will be translated. So we are we are trying to reach a broad group and make sure that we reach out to diverse groups, and hopefully we will be successful. So any input would be appreciated, because we don't know it all. So we'd like that input.
So that sounds pretty vague. So so there's no specifics at this point. Is that what I'm taking away?
Well, there's so many different opportunities here, so I'm just trying to think through. There are some specifics, and the translation is, we have that planned. The meeting in a box concept, that will be to reach out to specific groups. And we have a list. The city and the consultant team has started a list of different groups to include in that. And we're going through that for the initial stakeholder interviews. We're making sure that there are people of color on that list to interview, and asking them specifically, what are the ways that we can reach out and have make sure people are included. One of the challenges we have is that with doing everything virtually, we know that not everyone has access to the internet, to things electronically. So how do we make sure we reach everyone? So we're talking about doing things with the schools and trying to reach people through the schools. Or, in an ideal world, if libraries were open, we would have posters at libraries to advertise advertise meetings or tell people about the project. So obviously that's not an option right now, but maybe the grocery stores or different ways of making sure that people get out there and have a different way to get the information. Doing mailers, making sure people can get paper copies of the survey instead of just having it electronically. Just trying to work through those different, kind of thinking outside the box for different ways of reaching folks.
And I would also add to what Kimmy said is part of the point of why we're doing these initial stakeholder interviews is to hear from people about how they want to be engaged, what's the best ways to engage them. Me as a white cis person, I'm not going to assume that I know what's the best way to engage everyone. And so I think we need to be careful about how we talk about engagement and not make assumptions that we know what's best for everyone. And we need to be talking to people and actually asking them what's the best way to engage with people that are in your community. So we are still trying to obviously create specifics because we have to talk to everyone first. We can't already just know what we're going to do right away, right now. And our engagement is going to change over time. If we notice that things aren't working very well, we're going to have to adjust that. So that's what I wanted to add as well.
And that's why with every outreach effort that we're making, we're asking the question to make sure that it's always on the table. How do we make sure to reach a diverse group and those who are historically underrepresented?
Councillor Beatty, I think, was next.
So I just wanted to ask a couple clarifying questions, and actually that clarified some of what I was going to ask. But so we're not meeting again until after this first round of outreach. Is that I'm correct about that, right? So we won't see what's being asked. We'll just see it when it goes live and it's being asked, I guess, or we won't see whatever. I guess that's part of my question is it's not just going to be a survey. It's going to be a meeting. It's going to be multiple meetings. What exactly is that?
I think that it might be helpful to go back to the I prefer to see everybody's faces actually, but when I showed the what happens when, they're actually a public event that's really more of an introduction about what is middle housing. It's not it's not proposing anything. It's just introducing the concept. Then we actually have 2 CPICs before this material goes out for public review. Okay. That's a CPIC number 3 and then the joint session CPIC number 4. those are places where we're going to be presenting to you what we have asked, what we've heard, what we're going to ask, how we're going to present it, and getting your ideas and feedback. But that's actually going to inform quite a bit about how we make this outreach much more effective, reach audiences that we aren't reaching by doing it the way that we normally do. There's 2 more opportunities before we actually take the material out to the public.
Okay. So the meeting in a box idea, which is very intriguing, I have to say, is put into use where in that timeline?
During that community review period. And that community review
So
period,
that's
which
January.
Exactly, January, February, March.
Okay.
I see that Daniel has his hand up, Marcy.
Yeah, Daniel, please.
So my comment is, I think, similar to some of Renee's questions and comments, isn't necessarily on the project community engagement strategy. If I understand it correctly, it's partially on the city's existing community engagement priorities, which is, I think we should aim higher than reducing feelings of marginalization. And I think as part of this project, I would encourage the team to really prioritize engaging historically underrepresented communities in this work and in this process. And my sense is that would dovetail better with some of the emphasis of city council and the city manager's office right now. But I think language is important, and that's an opportunity to refine the language and make it stronger.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Sharon.
I know I was at an unrelated meeting in Milwaukee some months ago before we had COVID, and heard opinions expressed that probably nobody on this committee would express, but equating affordable housing to crime and poverty, and I'm sure anybody who's been involved in planning knows kind of the chain that can happen when one starts talking about affordable housing where people feel threatened by that. So I think that we should just be prepared for that, and whoever is managing public messaging could perhaps help us prep as members of the committee when we face those kinds of arguments.
Yes, great. That was actually going to be a big part of the Middle Housing 101 at the next presentation. And maybe I'll just take this opportunity to say that to add to what Kimmy was saying, we understand that middle housing is a way of making it possible to build more types of housing, more affordable housing, a wider variety of housing in all different neighborhoods, so that all people have more access to all kinds of housing at different levels of affordability. And affordable housing is something that people think a lot of, that it's one kind of thing. It's apartments in a certain zone, but that's actually the goal of middle housing, is to integrate much more housing choice into neighborhoods in all different forms. And home ownership is one of the biggest barriers to wealth creation, not being able to afford a home. And a lot of people can't afford a home because homes are generally built too big, and and because you can't build a smaller house because the zoning doesn't permit it. And the House Bill 2001 is really aimed at changing that. The single family zoning phenomenon is actually a relatively short-lived phase of zoning in America, and it is much more common in other periods that cities had a wide variety of housing types, and they had rental housing, and they had small home ownership options, and they had home ownership options mixed into areas that also had apartments in them. This idea of segregating housing by type is something that has put up barriers for a lot of people. So our goal is to talk to all kinds of people, renters and people who own property and people who live in neighborhoods that might have been kind of marginalized because they're dominated by rental apartments as one form of housing. And the whole philosophy behind middle housing is one of inclusivity. Who would like to comment next to give us any like thoughts, ideas about the public engagement strategy so far?
Marcy, Micah, and Celestina each have their hands up.
Okay, let's start with Micah and we'll go with Celestina next.
Yeah. I think to touch on something Renee mentioned and Daniel added to is that I think specificity is important, and I appreciated Daniel's point that we shouldn't be pushing just to reduce the marginalization of communities, but rather work to empower them to help shape our decisions. And so I think as we think about our public outreach, I think we need to make clear with folks what our clearly describe what the purpose and intent of our work is, and so that expectations are very clear, and then ensure that our communication is two-directional, that it's the city and this committee sharing the opportunity and the context, and then it's listening and taking that feedback and helping that shape what comes of this committee. And so it's really ensuring that we're empowering our community to help shape and craft this work.
Thank you, Micah. Celestina?
Hello, I think I'll be echoing a little bit, but I'd like to offer a tool maybe or suggestion that I really appreciated Mary's comment that this is iterative and we need to hear from the folks who have been historically marginalized about how they can best be engaged and supported. And also, I think having some kind of baseline information about the community engagement approach as it stands today, and then publicly showing the feedback and then publicly showing the iteration would serve to keep you all out of the fire a little bit, and also perhaps keep the community supported. And as I know staff know, and perhaps consultants have been briefed on, this has been a hot topic in the city, especially recently, and for fair reason. And so I would suggest that we make some kind of public online tracking feedback source specifically about community engagement throughout the process that shows the iteration.
Yeah, Eugene. You need to unmute, I believe, Eugene.
Recently, I was reading the Portland Pilot, and I think it was an Angel Falconer piece that mentioned that on the heels of the Black Lives protest in Milwaukee Bay, city council people had engaged in interviews with members of the BIPOC community. And I don't know if Lisa Beatty was involved in any of those conversations, but I don't know how hard it would be to follow up with those individuals that gave input to Milwaukee government folks about what their thoughts are about what our community in Milwaukee would look like. Just a thought.
So,
yeah, thank you.
Can I respond to that a little bit?
Yes, please.
I think that the result of those interviews, when they weren't interviews really, they were listening sessions where counselors were present. We were present in no more than 2 because we would have a quorum problem. But the notes from those were actually in our city council packet from this past Tuesday. So if you're interested in seeing, if anybody is interested in seeing the notes from those listening sessions, they are online in the city council packet from Tuesday's meeting. I'm sure that the city manager has been, compiling a list of contacts from that, and I'm sure that is some of the people Mary meant and Kimmy meant when they were talking about their outreach. I mean, the city's definitely, and we have had, in the comp plan, in the CPIC process, in the town hall meetings that we had when we were able to have those at the Waldorf School, we had Spanish translation. We had a fairly decent Spanish outreach, effort. And so we're not starting from zero here. I mean, we can definitely do better, and we definitely, should be engaging and trying to find out how to do better. But we're not starting from zero.
Great.
So we have 10 minutes, well, a little less than, and I'd like to give everybody else a chance to just weigh in quickly on what they've seen, the talk they've heard. So I'm going to actually call on people. Hope you don't mind. How about Sharon? I think we heard from Sharon. How about Nicole?
Hi, I don't have any really substantive feedback at this time, except to say that I would love to facilitate meetings in the box. So whenever that gets together, I would really love to do that kind of community outreach.
Wow, thank you. Okay.
Thank you for asking.
How about Lauren?
Yeah, I'm interested in doing the presentation in a box. I think the first time around, I hope that we are with someone from staff to help facilitate, or that there's some method for kind of training, and then that we're pairing up with folks from this group when we do that presentation. I think that would probably be a wise way to go about doing it. And then I'm just always really try to be conscious about the diversity on this group, and maybe the lack of diversity, and just the extent of which, in order to make a real, to have trust within our community, we're going to have to work extra hard here to be super transparent and work even harder to reach out into our community to make sure that whatever it is, the work that we do is received in a way that they can trust our message, they can trust our process as being transparent. Otherwise, I think if we fail or misstep in that direction, this could all be for naught, and it would, and it's really up to this group and to the city to help lead us in a way that's very diverse and transparent for the community. That's all.
Thanks, Lauren. How about Stefan?
I think this is a question. First a comment. I think this is proceeding as well as it possibly could, and I'm glad to be part of it. There are huge questions to answer, and some of it certainly isn't easy. But the question that I have, and forgive me if you covered this in the June meeting where I did not attend, but I'm wondering about process and for process of this group for decision making. If we end up, I mean, there's no clear one person is chairing, somebody can make a motion, somebody can second the motion, that kind of a structure. So given that, I'm assuming we're trying to achieve consensus. If not, then potentially it becomes a report that goes to the Planning Commission with a whole lot of different opinions without necessarily reaching consensus. So could either Marcy or Vera, could you respond to that?
I would respond by saying that I think we have to figure out exactly what, I'm not sure that we're trying to achieve consensus, or I know that we're trying to achieve agreement and support, but I'm not sure if that would be defined as consensus, and I'm not actually sure how we would define it. It's a really good question that you're asking, Stefan, and it's good that you're asking it right now. I would say we want to talk about that more with Kimmy and with staff, and then bring that answer back to you at the next meeting.
I think that's fair. Thank you.
All right, so let's see. Jennifer, I don't think we've heard from you yet.
Yeah, I would just echo a lot of what has already been said. I really liked the suggestion about having a very simple online reference point where people can see all of the touch points that have been made. Just in my own anecdotal experience, it's easy for people to say, you didn't ask, or we weren't informed, or there weren't opportunities. So that's just one way, not so much as like a CYA, but also just a documentation of the process that people can refer to, but also that they can see where the next point of contact is so that they can go to a meeting or attend a call, and being accountable to them in that way would just be a simple way to do that. I assume the city already might have a mechanism for that, but I do like that idea a lot. And I look forward to being a part of it and being a voice for sharing the information.
Yeah, thank you. I do want to point out that we have Kimmy and her firm Barney and Worth. This is what they do, is public engagement. And I'm an architect, an urban planner, designer. I'm leading this team, and we know it's a very technical project focused on regulations in the end. But we didn't short shrift the public engagement piece, because we know this project is going to be extremely important, that it is transparent and inclusive and thorough. So I just want to give Kimmy some credit. You'll be hearing from her much more through the course of the project. And she's a really big, important part of how we're going to achieve that, the goals that you've articulated here together for transparency and completeness as much as we can. And I appreciate what Councillor Beatty is saying about not starting from zero. We're trying to understand where we're starting from as well. So, but I understand, I appreciate the fact that the city is not at zero. Did we miss anybody who would like to provide feedback on the plan thus far? Okay, so we're right at the end. So I would ask Vera to say goodbye to everybody for us. Thank you so much. I look forward to conversations with you next time.
Marcy, we do need to provide opportunity for the public, because we do have some people from the public.
Okay, okay, thanks. We have members of the public. Help me with how we're going to take in those questions.
Yeah, we have 3 attendees here at the meeting, and so if any of you would like to ask any questions or have any comments, if you could, I think, Mary, the chat, or is it the Q&A is the right way for them to let us know?
Q&A, and I think
Q&A.
You may also, if you want to verbally ask a question, I think you can also raise your hand.
Yes, I just meant, can you just let me know if you have a question or something, and we can,
the Q&A
and we can, and I can bring you over. So if you can just let me know either by raising your hand, those of you who are the attendees, or just let me know in the Q&A that you have a question, I can promote you over to ask your question. Anyone? I guess not. But thank you for coming. Oh, okay, Lisa, I'm going to bring you over.
Okay. Hi. I want to first thank everyone for all the time they're putting in tonight. It's been a great meeting. My name's Lisa Gunyon-Ranker, and I live in the Ardenwald neighborhood, and I really appreciate what you're doing. My question comes back to a slide that I saw, which this just might be an error, but I just wanted to find out. It was said that meeting number 4 on 12/17 is the same day as meeting number 5. for the CPIC. So I was like, well, how does that work? Because there is an engagement in the middle, and I didn't know quite how that worked. So anyway, that's just from me.
Lisa, it's a good question. I think we had a typo on the slide about the dates of the meetings. So yeah, I don't think we have 2 meetings having the same night. That would be tough. So no, we'll make sure that we correct that. And when we have the project website live, I'm hoping it's tomorrow. We're working on getting that ready. Then we will be able to populate it, and we'll send out links to all of those things as well. So yeah, thank you. Great question. Thank you for noticing that. Appreciate it. And Marcy, there's a question here. Elvis Clark has a question about if mixed use development buildings are part of this phase of the project. And I think, Elvis, the way I would answer that question is that we're dealing with residential development. And so mixed use buildings generally would not be something that we would be thinking about. So I don't think so, but it will depend on kind of how we sort of lay this out as far as that goes. But yeah, and if I could, while I have the floor for 1 second, we do have a listserv, an opt-in listserv for email updates for this project. It's the Comprehensive Plan Implementation Project. It's on the notifications page on the city's website, and we encourage folks to sign up for that, because that's how we're also communicating out with folks. We're keeping a list of folks that are interested in this project.
And we can send you all the link.
Absolutely.
So you can spread it with the people that you know.
Yeah.
And it's a 2-step process, which we just found out today. Unfortunately, it is. So when you sign up, you'll also get a confirmation email that you have to click on. And if you don't confirm the second time, you won't receive emails, which is kind of frustrating.
Evidently, we do have
What was the
13
link
people.
again, Vera?
We'll send it out to everyone, for that. Evidently, we do have about a dozen folks that signed up for it, but way more people signed up for it, but didn't confirm. So they're not getting any of the emails. So that's why we're trying to get the word out. And I'm going to, I'm seeing if I can get a list of those email addresses, and I will directly communicate with all of those people to get them on the list properly. So we will definitely do that. Yeah.
Are you?
Okay. Lisa, did you have another question?
Well, I just wondered, are you not going to build on the list that David had for the last phase? You're going to start all over, or you're going to include that list as well?
No. So Lisa, what we decided to do is we contacted all of those folks and let them know about this opt-in. We didn't want to automatically start barraging people with emails if they weren't interested. So we really wanted people to opt in, but we let them know that they could. It just, as we were talking about it, it seemed more fair and to respect people's privacy about not automatically sending them stuff. So we asked them to take one more step and opt into this process. There are a lot of people on that list that may not have been interested. So we directly communicated with them about opting in on this project. Yeah. Lisa Gunyon-Rinker, did you have a question? We're sort of running up against the clock, so I just want to make sure that it looks like your hand is up. Do you have another question?
Nope.
No? Okay, great.
I think we just forgot to lower the hand.
Got it.
So.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. And Elvis, it looks like you have your hand up for a question, so I am going to bring you over. Okay, Elvis, you should be.
Oh, I don't have a question. I was trying to ask that same question, whether mixed use.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Okay. So answered. Great. Thank you very much. Okay. And I don't see that anyone else in the attendees window wishes to ask any more questions. I think we're good to go.
Yeah.
So we're 5 minutes over time, folks. I'm sorry. Tried really hard to keep us on task. I appreciate it. Thank you very much. If anyone has questions, comments, any of that, in between now and our next meeting of all of the things that we've been talking about, please email me and I will make sure that we get all those questions and comments spread around for us and the consultant team, and we can get going. You'll be getting more emails from me. Is everyone getting emails from me? I hope so. You're all here, so I think that's happening. So that's great. But if you have any feedback for us as we go for this project, please let me know. Thanks so much for spending your Thursday evening with us. Let's fingers crossed for some rain, right? And hopefully that we can get through this. But please stay safe, everyone, and stay healthy. Thanks again for your time. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you for the next meeting. Is there anything else that I'm forgetting to remind people of? I don't think so.
No.
We're good? Okay,
We're good.
great. Thanks very much, everyone.